Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
There we go. So I see your nice little artwork in the background. And Lena, because this is an audio podcast, it's easier if you turn your video off.
Okay.
Thank you. And so how this is going to work is I'm going to and we'll take it away and we'll talk about your podcast as well. And then this should be to you by next Tuesday.
Okay.
And so here we go. Welcome to Butterflies of Wisdom, everyone. Today I have Lena Göthberg with me from Sweden. Thank you very much. She's in my future. It's Friday afternoon here, Saturday morning there, so she's in my future. But today we're going to talk about, believe it or not, Lena has a podcast on the shipping industry. And when I say shipping, I'm talking about big boats that come in to the harbors of Miami, to the harbors of California, and basically drop off fruits and basically drop off everything under the sun that we need. And the reason why the shipping industry is so fascinating to me is, for those of you who don't know, I spent half my life growing up on the East Coast in the Caribbean, the Bahamas to be exact. And so I saw these freight ships come in and drop toiletry supplies, fruit, because every single thing they bring into the Bahamas has to be delivered by boat. So I'm really excited to talk to Lena today about what made her start her shipping podcast. So without further ado, I'm going to let Lena take it away.
Thank you, Wim. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
You are so welcome.
Well, I've been working in the shipping industry, or in the maritime industry, if you want to call it that, for 25 years or something like that. I studied law from the beginning, and I started in the insurance business. But I was recruited 25 years ago to become an insurance broker, a marine insurance broker. That is how it all started in 1990. It's a long time ago. And I became a marine insurance broker, which meant that I had ship owners as clients. So I was broking insurance or buying insurance for those ship owners, for those big ships that you're talking about. I did that for 10 years, and then I became an underwriter, that is the insurance, the one who is insuring the ships. So yeah. I was the risk taker, and so I swapped a little bit, but there was still insurance for 10 years. And when you are working with insurance for those big ships, the cost is so high, so you always meet either the ship owner or the CEO or the CFO.
Yes.
So I got to know them. I had a big network of people high up in the companies. When I was asked to take care of an organization working with business intelligence for the shipping industry globally, that is all the things that is influencing the industry, like macroeconomics, the price for steel, how many ships are built and how many will be delivered from now on. And I did that for a couple of years, and was asked to make to rebrand the brand of that organization, which was called the Institute of Shipping Analysis. they didn't give me any budget to do that. So I decided maybe I should look into social media and online communication. Of course, that costs you the time you put into it, but I decided to explore that route. Yeah, I started using all the different social channels, and then I thought about, what about a podcast? Shipping is made for storytelling. You tell a story about the
Pass the
ship.
time, too.
Yeah. And the industry is rather old-fashioned.
Yeah, it is.
In every sense, except for when it comes to the ships, because there they are the cutting edge. They know the latest things are installed on those ships. So I decided why not start a podcast and speak to the people who makes the world go around? I mean, the maritime professionals. I have never ever met a boring person in the shipping industry. They are all characters, and they got so much to tell. So that is why I started the podcast.
Well, that is amazing, because you're talking to a niche that doesn't get spotlight exposure, but yet it helps all of us in our everyday lives.
Yes.
Because without these big sea containers, nothing would get done. I mean, as I said at the top of the call, the Bahamas, where I spent most of my life, the water even has to come in by a ship. The water for us to drink even has to come in by a ship. So without the shipping industry, I don't know where California would be. I don't know where we would all be.
No, 90% of what you see around you is probably shipped there on a keel at one time in the supply chain, in the transportation. And as we usually say to ourselves, that half the population of the world would starve and the rest would freeze if we didn't do our job.
Yeah, exactly. So are you still dealing with the shipping industry, or are you more on the storytelling end of it now through your podcast?
Well, I do work as a consultant, and I do consultancy work both for the shipping industry, but also for... I live in Gothenburg, which is a small city on the west coast of Sweden. But it's the hometown of Volvo, for instance. So we got the autonomous cars testing out over here.
Yes, yes, you do. I was just going to say that. Yes, you do. And Volvo.
And we got Ericsson, and we got a lot of other well-known international brands here in Sweden, and especially in Gothenburg. The digital revolution or transformation is happening on shore here. So I do some consultancy in that kind of business as well, because I know that what is happening on shore will also happen at sea at one point.
You make a very good point, because someday people are more into autonomous vehicles than they are autonomous ships. But someday those ships will become autonomous, and mark my words, and then we'll have very upset shipping captains who are out of a job.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And it won't take as long as you think.
No.
People tell me that it's easier to have an autonomous ship than an autonomous car.
Yeah.
Because there is not so much traffic at sea. But then again...
Yes. So, what has been your favorite story you have shared on your podcast?
I think it is the young women, because this is an old traditional male-dominated industry.
Male-dominated industry. Oh, yes.
So I'm a bit of a unique person, being a female who has survived in the management level for such a long time. And
Yes.
but
Yes,
now
you
when I
are.
meet the young people, the young women, and I really make an effort to have 50% of my guests are women. And that is so unusual because you hardly see any woman at all speaking, delivering a keynote speech or anything like that in our events. So I make an effort of having at least 50% female guests. And that makes me so happy when I meet the young women in their 30s or in the, they know so many new things that we need to know from them. And they are willing to share their knowledge in such a different way than the old men who are still in charge.
Yeah. And the older generation has to get used to autonomous ships one of these days.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we're not necessarily talking about tugboats, are we? We're talking about big sea containers that get loaded on ships. We're not Tugboats can't necessarily carry the sea containers, or maybe they can. I don't know.
No, those
No,
are the
no,
ones
no
assisting the.
tugboats.
Yeah,
Okay,
the tugboats are
so
assisting the big ones.
the tugboats lead the ships carrying the sea containers. So I thought, and now you guys get to see why the shipping industry is so interesting to me, because as I said, we couldn't survive without ships.
No, no, that is the life. If you live in an island, you
Yeah,
need to get your supply from
yeah,
somewhere else.
yeah. You
And
need to.
also, I mean, 60% of what is transported at sea is some kind of energy. So it's also, oil, petrol, gas,
60%?
gas, yeah, of everything that is transported. Because
Wow.
we don't have those commodities in our
Wow.
backyard.
60%. I didn't realize. So, Lena, what has been your favorite story that you would be able to share from your podcast on my podcast? What episode should my listeners go listen to?
I think they should start by number one. My first
Yes.
interview was with the captain on board the world's largest container vessel at that time, when they called in my hometown. So the Maersk McKinney Møller called in Port of Gothenburg, and that was 2 years ago. I hadn't even bought my own equipment at that time because I didn't know if this was for me or if it wasn't. So I borrowed
Yeah.
a microphone, and I managed to get on board that ship and sit down and have a chat with the guy. And Captain Peterson is such a nice fellow, and he's sharing what it's like to be the captain on board the biggest ship in the world. I think you should start with that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
then you can jump to 35 if you didn't want to listen to all of them.
then you can jump to 35. So, are you saying you actually go out on the ships and meet with captains and do live podcasts?
I decided very early that I wouldn't do my interviews via Skype or internet in any form, because the people I want to meet usually are not used to Skype or to Zoom as we are
Yeah.
doing this today.
Yeah.
And it would just be even more odd if I asked them to sort of get connected via the internet.
Yes.
So I bought myself a microphone, and I always go and see my guests. Yes.
And so of course they're so used to being on the ships, and ships, pray tell, don't have very good internet. The reason why I say that is because ships are moving, and immediately right before we got on this call, Zoom goes, your internet stable. Your internet is unstable. And I'm thinking, well, imagine if we were doing this on a ship.
Yeah.
I literally thought that. I literally thought that as I sat down here today and read at a class Zoom. I'm like, imagine if we were doing this on the ship. There would be no way. There would be no way. I mean,
yeah, you're right and you're wrong.
yeah,
You're right, because that is what it's like, what it used to be like. I think things are changing now. Many of ship owners are now able to connect their ships via satellite, of course, but there are innovations, technical innovations being done right now. So it will be possible to the crew on board to be connected, because the ship owner wants the ship to be connected. There are so many things happening on the ship that they want to see on shore now. So, and there are so many machine-to-machine communication, which goes from the ship to
communication, which drives the ship. I mean, my family has access to a small yacht, and that yacht has more technology on it to drive it than I have ever seen in my life. And so technology on these ships is getting more complicated than you would think.
Yes, and I did an interview with a young lady a couple of episodes ago. One of the biggest ship owners in the world is Maersk. You have seen those containers with Maersk inside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maersk.
So they have now worked together with Ericsson, and they have put on GPS on each and every container containing refrigerated things inside, food or flowers or things like that. And then they can control that from shore, from the office in Copenhagen. They can have control over those containers and the temperature in them, and they can, they can follow them. They can, totally.
Temperature controlling containers. Yeah. Well, isn't that cool? You're talking about Sony Ericsson, aren't you? You're not talking about Ericsson as in a different company. You're talking about Sony, that's based out of Sweden.
Yeah.
So just to make that clear to my audience, Lena's talking about how they can control, along with Sony technology, they can temperature control the shipping containers from the shoreline while the ship is out at sea.
Yep.
So that is dead cool.
Yeah. And I have made an interview with a gentleman who's working for a satellite company, and that will come out in 2 weeks' time, I think. Because the price for broadband at sea, if we should call it that, because you need that broadband to be connected, is coming down. The price is coming down, and that is what's needed, because otherwise the crew on board won't be allowed to use internet on board.
Internet and connect with their families. Now, have you talked to people who made this their why in life? Or have you talked to people who just been recruited by the shipping industry?
Sorry, I don't really understand the difference. Could you please explain to me?
Yeah, I will. Have you, what I meant by your why is, have you talked to people who have had being on a boat, being in the shipping industry, their lifelong passion as they're growing up? Or do you essentially talk to people who were just looking for a 9-to-5 job in the shipping industry?
Okay, I see. I now understand why I didn't understand the difference. Because hardly anyone who starts working in the industry ever leaves. Because we get that bug to be in the shipping industry, and in the old days, usually people were recruited from the sea. If you had been sailing, if you had been a sailor on board, a crew on board a ship, then you had a place on shore when you came back, so to say. It's only now, lately, that the industry has opened up to other kind of knowledge and things that we need into our industry. And I think just by having recruited almost only from crew, that means that there hasn't been hardly any women in this industry, because only 2% of the sailors are female worldwide. 2% of all the sailors are female. So there is not a lot to choose from then if you are only giving people job ashore who has been at sea. So yes,
Well,
I have been talking to everyone. Almost all my friends have been sailing. So I'm surrounded with people who lives and breathes and have salt in their veins.
Yes, once you get addicted to being on the ocean, you can't stop.
No.
You cannot stop. I know that from private yachting. I know that from now sea containing and on these big ships. Once you get addicted to the sea, you can't stop. If someone was going to take a fisherman out from the sea, the fisherman would go nuts.
Yeah, I agree.
And so where can people find you, and where can people find your podcast?
Okay, my podcast you can find on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you usually find. Where do I find your podcast? Or on my website, which is shippingpodcast.com. I have got a Twitter account with the same name. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram with Shipping Podcast. My name is Lena Göthberg. Maybe I should spell that, because that is the name of my Twitter handle as well. LenaGothberg. That is me. And you can find me in all social channels. In English, I got a website in Swedish, but I hardly think that your audience would be able to read it.
You always think, you might be surprised. You might be surprised. I might have fans in Swedish that want to read it. Although Google Translate is pretty good. So if they want to read it in its actual format, they can.
Yeah, they can just Google me and they will find it.
And so before I let you go, Lena, I want you to ask me a couple questions.
When did you start your podcast?
When did I start my podcast? I started my podcast in 2010, but I've been doing various forms of this podcast since 2010.
Why did you start it?
Why did I start it? Because I wrote a book also in 2010, I Come a Win, which could still be found on Amazon. And that book took off. That book transferred into this podcast.
Okay. And how has the podcast been received?
The podcast has been received very well. People like it when I infuse my story with other people's stories.
What has been the hardest for you? With the podcast, I mean.
With the podcast, yeah, those show notes. I hate show notes. I truly despise show notes. So if I can figure out a way to either eliminate the show notes completely, or which I'm not going to do quite yet, or I'll just nail it down. I hate those show notes. I don't mind the bios of the people. I just don't like the extra stuff in the show notes, because people tend to listen to the podcast more than they tend to go to the websites and tend to read the show notes.
Yeah, I agree. But then again, I write my show notes, and that also becomes a blog post for my website. So that
yeah,
but I agree with you.
Yeah, those show notes are not my friend. Those show notes are not my friend, and they won't be. They won't be. And so if I can figure out a way to make them work in the next couple of months, I will.
Do you know of any more podcasts that are produced and presented by disabled people?
Do I know? If I knew you were going to ask me this question, I would have done my research.
Sorry.
The Ability podcast by Eric Gall out of Canada. Actually, it's Empowering Ability. It's not the Ability podcast. That's a different podcast by Jacob Holt. The Ability podcast by Jacob Holt. The Empowering Ability podcast by Eric Gall, based out of Canada. He's phenomenal. You guys should go check him out. I'm trying to think. There's very few of us that do podcasts, just like the shipping industry. There's very few of us that do podcasts on these specific niches, Lena. I wish there was more for the shipping industry, and I wish there was more for the disabled. I truly do.
Yeah, so do I. I agree with you. I would welcome more people to do podcasting because, there is so much to tell.
Yes. But I appreciate you guys coming and listening to Lena's story. And again, all her information will be in the show notes. And I will catch you guys next week. By the time you listen to it, it will be Tuesday. And let's go make this an incredible week and just make this a successful school year 2018 for those of you who are going back to school. And I thank Lena for her time. Thanks, you guys.